Welcome to this session of the Cloud Exchange. My guest today is Kass Singh, the Vice President and Solution Architect in the Health Group at Leidos. Kass, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure.
We're going to continue our conversation today. We just heard from VA regarding how they're using the cloud in healthcare. You're going to open the door a little bit more for us and explain from a Leidos perspective. So let's just start at the beginning. A lot of healthcare agencies, whether it's HHS or VA or whomever, are starting to really look at cloud as a way to really promote, push forward their services, how they deal with customer experience and the like, and really putting mission software in the cloud. What are you seeing? What are you hearing from your clients?
We're certainly seeing a very large move into the adoption of cloud in various ways. And that move to cloud is often borne by the need to reduce costs, but also the burden on the health staff, whether it be the nurse staff, the doctors, etc. And we can go into, as we talk, the different aspects of that and what that means and the different parts of cloud. But we're definitely seeing an increase in adoption in the health industry.
You talk about reduced costs, burden on staff. I think those are the two things that we've heard about cloud over the last 10, 12, 13 years, ever since in the federal world, the cloud first strategy. Is it really about cost reduction, or is it more about burden? Is that what you're seeing agencies lean in towards now? Really, how do we make it easier for both our employees, but also for our customers?
Let me give some examples. I think that might kind of help the different use cases that we run into, because it's probably all of the above. Starting with an IT focus. So when we work with the various CTO divisions, one of our clients, for example, needed to reduce their hardware and software costs over a 5-year period. So we started by looking at their ecosystem with their software as well as their infrastructure and joined them together to put that strategy together in terms of what they were ready for. And there were some instances where cloud wasn't the answer, but there was ways we could help them accelerate the benefits of using a shared service that comes with cloud, and also the ability to burst during peak periods so you don't have overcapacity of IT. And part of it was also, a lot of people in the beginning think, I've got to do all of it at once. So a big part of what we do is, what are you ready for? What's the right migration path strategy for you? And this particular customer that I'll start with was looking at their data costs, and especially when they were exchanging with so many different products. And they had a number of SaaS providers as well. So some of the data was being transmitted over the WAN. So what we did, we then looked at what was ready. And at the end of it, we also helped them reduce the data management costs and the IT staff's costs. So that one was more focused on how do you reduce the operational and maintenance burden of the staff to allow them to help with the transformation and they're not caught up in the sustainment activity. Another example, obviously we've all gone through COVID and there was a lot of pressure to increase the virtual health solutions. And the biggest challenge we face, or we hear about from our clients, is the adoption of this technology and the automation, especially from clinical staff. Because their main focus is the patient and their wellness. And we needed to find a way to do that without, when I say increasing burden of the clinical staff, it's so they can focus on the patient and less on the IT administrative part of what they do. So like all health ecosystems, it's never one product, it's never one software, it's an array of them. And even an EHR has multiple modules that have to talk together. So when we looked at those automation and cloud strategies, we had to take it from a patient, but also a workflow perspective. So we look at it and say, I'll give an example. When you had to call a doctor in the COVID, you couldn't go into the office, you needed a virtual telehealth solution. All these products have it, but there wasn't a product that orchestrated that end to end. So you could book a single appointment, multiple appointments, and all the information about you as a patient had to be available at the right step of the process, regardless of whether it was a nurse, a caseworker, whoever it was, needed to see the right information at the right time. And that required a combination of new software, as well as moving some of the legacy systems in various cloud migration paths to a different platform.
I just had a recent conversation about the role of the systems integrator. And, there's been a lot of debate over the last 20, 25 years about what does the systems integrator does. And I think what you just explained was the perfect example of, well, I have this SaaS platform and I have that infrastructure platform and I have this other SaaS platform, but I don't have anything that connects them all. And it sounds like that's what you all were able to do is connect each of those platforms. So the doctor, the nurse, the healthcare provider just sees that front end that says, oh, I can get Kass's information when I meet with Kass through my telehealth visit and not worry about, oh, do I have to go to that system and that other system? That sounds like what you're talking through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to call it a combination of system integration as well as service integration, and also looking at your entire portfolio and making sure when you do the configuration, it considers all of it. And you look at it and say, what's the best tool in my entire ecosystem to perform this function? And it's about optimizing the investments you've already made on top of any additional scripts or products you may need to insert to make that process as smooth as possible. Because what you don't want to do is create so much custom software or create a different problem trying to resolve that. So there's a fine art and balance of kind of bringing that all together.
You definitely know what a great word, custom software. We've heard that many times. And yet agencies sometimes they do that too much. I want to go back to something you said about the data costs and the egress costs and the ingress costs. We've heard that over the years as agencies get surprised by it. When you're talking to that client, is that something that they were getting kind of bit by? That, oh, we moved to the cloud and we were very excited, and then, oh, that's just costing us a lot more because of that data challenge. Is that part of how you help them?
Part of it, and I might have to take a few steps back in the planning. So sometimes a lot of people misunderstand what cloud means. Cloud isn't one solution. Even when you're looking at buying a simple storage, there are 30, 40, 50 types and also different licensing models you could use. So when we do that portfolio analysis and go in and say, well, what is the data doing? How is the data moving? And then making sure that you select the right one. And the migration path, some of our clients, or examples, it could just be a particular software, they may have lifted and shifted it. But really what they needed to do is some redesign, either the business workflow or the actual technical workflow first, or completely redesign and so forth. So selecting the right cloud migration path is key. And also looking at what is your business ready to adopt and making sure what you can implement big bang straight away versus what needs to be done in a transformational way, especially when you start getting into RPA, AI. You got to work through and increase the trust of that technology as you go through. So I would say it's the journey, not necessarily a destination, to optimize it. And there's a few clients we went through in the agency example I gave earlier. We started with a lift and shift, and as there was opportunities aligned to their refresh plan, we redesigned, we refactored along the way. So they didn't have to wait to get the benefits, whatever it was, the objective that they were looking to get.
It's always interesting to hear this debate over, do you lift and shift, do you not? Some CIOs I talk to are like, oh, never. And some are saying, no, we had to because we just couldn't pay for the data center anymore. So it's interesting that you're seeing both too, still even today, so much further past that initial cloud first.
In some examples, it makes sense, especially on your legacy applications that are so entrenched in the business process workflow. Lift and shift might be the right choice. And then it's about how do you surround that legacy application that you've lifted and shifted with more modern technology to enhance the user experience or the employee experience in a composable way that doesn't cause other challenges.
The related piece to this is looking at the business processes. And a lot of people will say, well, you don't just move to the cloud because you could find yourself paying for more, like the egress costs and the ingress costs with data when you just lift and shift. And you have to really look at the business processes. What's that effort like when you go into an agency and talk to them about their business processes, either before you move to the cloud or after they've lifted and shifted, but still, okay, what's the next part of that journey? How do those conversations go? What are some of the things you hear from agencies?
Yeah. Quite often it starts with working with them to understand the current technical landscape and areas that we don't need to pull in the business stuff. Because the first thing is, what could we do within the technical workforce to understand the technical patterns? So it's about analyzing the technical usage, and based on that, we will make initial assertions and then use the business community and the customer groups to validate that. And that allows us to really accelerate that. And we use our own analytics tools, etc., to analyze a large volume of data to be able to do the assessment and make an initial recommendation. So that way you have something to start with and then you refine it based on expertise in each individual client environment.
At what point, generally speaking, and I know you'll tell me it depends and everything's different, but generally speaking, when do you bring the business side in? Because so often we hear, for instance, with DevSecOps, right? You got to have the business at the table. And I don't think you're saying no, they shouldn't be at the table, but there's things that can happen first to make things better, to save money. And then when the business folks come in, that's when really the acceleration happens.
It's also how close the application you're migrating is impacted by the move. So some of it might be an IT software that is behind the scenes to a user. And there are others that are mission-centric that might require a different user group, or those that are patient-facing obviously are going to require a lot more calibration. As much as possible, you want to bring the business in early. It's more their level of effort you want to minimize during the entire journey. So keep them informed, get their feedback all the way through, and make sure we achieve the mission objective. But where we can, we understand that their primary focus is to the patient.
And this actually tags back really well to what you talked about just a few minutes ago about the trust in the technology, creating that trust. Because if you're a mission owner and you're going, listen, I just want the telehealth to work. I want to get on, see my patient, and help the veteran or help whomever, and I don't care about the back end. But so they have to trust that you're going to get there. Maybe talk a little bit about how are you starting to work with clients about creating that trust? Because we've heard about cloud. We all use the cloud in some way in our personal lives. But doesn't mean when it comes to my business, to my mission, I'm going to trust the cloud, especially if it always worked fine for me before, right? I'm sure you hear that.
To allow me to give you an example where I can go into specifics, I'll use one of our internal teams. We have a number of clinical staff that perform medical exams for disability benefits. And the users came to us and said, I'm spending a lot of time going through each patient's medical documentation. And some of this medical documentation was in images. And they could be handwritten, they could be typed, and hundreds of pages per patient before they came into the exam. So we took that challenge and into our innovation team, and we went through and said, okay, what could we do within that? And when we started that journey, we did that initial process mapping of all the different disability benefit questionnaires, which was more than 80 of them, and flipped that to an individual patient, because one patient could be applicable for multiple benefits that all had different criteria. And then when you overlaid them, that created a very different way of looking at the problem. And as we progressed, we were able to introduce a series of projects to enhance that, starting with image analytics, doing data tagging, summarizing, so to make it easier for them to know, based on what the patient is coming in for, what part of this 100-page, 200-page document is most important for me to read. And as they progress through the life cycle, use things like rules engines to help them follow the process and make sure they were compliant, to reduce the amount of time that a patient had to come back for a follow-up visit. So increase quality, increase accuracy, and as a result, enhance the experience. In addition to that, we also have had a number of projects where you do the voice to text, and so they don't have to scribe it and they can spend more time with the patient, but you want to capture the results and prompt the clinical staff real time what else they may need to check based on the results that they're entering at the time. And that is incremental, and you might start with smaller groups and the adoption could be a little bit different. But in that example, we implemented many automation projects that we continue to evolve or insert new technology when it's available.
When you talk about automation, there's again, you have to get people used to it, you have to create the trust. What's the big challenge around automation that you're seeing, and how does the cloud kind of make that trust happen more quickly, or at least get people to go, okay, I understand, I will try it out and see how it goes?
I would say that cloud is helping that journey when you start looking at orchestrating and the various components. So you could go in and build one system that automates all of it, or if you're able to burst into the cloud in a hybrid environment where some of them are legacy, some of them are new, you can insert automation of certain steps of your workflow very quickly. And you can potentially have a number of mature automation, especially with things like AI, with products that have already matured, that it's proven. So you don't have to start the journey from scratch. You can insert technology for certain parts of it with that. So I would say that's probably a big part of it in terms of how long it takes. And when people see progressive success, they see confidence in it, and then you can move a lot faster and start with point solutions and then grow them into orchestrated solutions to end-to-end.
When you talk about mature solutions, one of the things that just came to mind was we see this a lot in the financial management world, kind of the back office systems. I'm sure it's growing in certain other parts of healthcare as well, is obviously use of robotics process automation as one of those mature things. Is that something that you are hearing a lot from your clients, or are they asking for, whether it's RPA or some other sort of kind of software to help, again, we'll go back to the word automate, these manual processes that, like the example you used with your internal, a lot of images, how do we automate that? Are you hearing that request for either RPA or similar?
I see all those as almost tools in our toolkit or engineering artifacts we use to achieve an outcome. Quite often we'll hear things like, I need to increase availability and reliability of my systems. One of the things we've used cloud for is to enable that. So they may not have a hot DR, they may have a cold DR, they may look at service continuity and to be able to expand that. And when we look at whether we use RPA, AI, image analytics, ML, whether you use different services, all depends on, it starts with the objective. So quite often it's, I need to reduce costs, I need to enable this capability to a patient, but I'm bound by budget. So typically it's achieving an objective within certain constraint or boundary or timeline. And then it's about us being able to draw in various technology to look at what's the right answer. So it's very rare that we get a situation to say, I have to use RPA. Quite often people say, I need automation, and then we kind of get to the next level in terms of what type of automation is the right answer.
There's a lot of supporting government right now for automation. I think people see the value. We heard the move from low value work to high value work. That was a big buzzword a couple of years ago. And then the use of, again, RPA is one example, something that really kind of caught on very quickly. From your perspective, I mean, this all has to happen in a hybrid environment, right? This is, agencies are going to live in the cloud, some on-premise for the future. Maybe talk a little bit about that idea of digital health transformation and how to kind of make it work well. What are some of the things you're seeing from your government clients around this issue of digital health transformation?
Yeah. That example we talked about earlier around virtual health, that was one where our client had their EHR hosted in a private cloud that the vendor had, and that EHR was surrounded by a number of applications, some on-prem, some very legacy systems, and also a number of SaaS offerings as well. So part of that was ensuring the tight integration of all those systems together.
When you have on-prem and SaaS and you're looking at integration, there are challenges with integration. And sometimes it's this idea that the two systems don't talk to each other, or the data is not perfect. Do you talk about those data challenges? Do you talk about those kind of integration challenges to get, again, because the front end, I don't care what happens on the back end, I just want it to work.
Yeah, good point. And I think across that, it is sometimes about data exchange. So how are they actually integrated? Is it tight integration or is it loose integration? And the use of things like API gateways, but also business workload-driven integration. So sometimes we'll see environments where you've got all these applications tightly integrated, but really they're just exchanging a small amount of data. So then you start looking at, is establishing a data platform the right answer? And information exchange is really all you may need for some of that. So I would say the data exchange and interoperability is definitely a big challenge in the health ecosystems. And from a technical perspective, sometimes integration means simply data exchange, and it could be very lightweight, or it could be, how do I simplify the application environment, and how do I make that integration loose in whatever technology form that you do that in.
I'm glad you mentioned APIs. That's one of the things we're hearing a lot about. There's a lot of folks talking about, okay, what's your API strategy? I I'm hopeful to have an interview with someone in the government around that just shortly. Is that the key to a lot of this data exchange, is having the right application program interface, the API strategy? Or is it really more about, okay, is the data standardized, for lack of a better word? Do we when we call a telehealth, we all understand what it means?
It's combination, the FHIR standards, the HIE, there are certain ways that the health industry, to meet compliance, etc., you have to exchange it in a particular way, and there are some common data models. Saying that, every application works a little bit differently and they have different models you've got to translate them with. So when I look at it from that perspective, I would say the answer there is really looking at the business model, right. But also what I'm seeing a big shift in is creating composable software, or looking at, if I'm looking at enhancing the digital experience, do I need a full app, or is really what I'm after is a lightweight UI and have the complexity below with your applications, but maybe all I really want is a digital experience interface that's not tightly integrated in the back end to give me the enhancements I need. That way I can get immediate direct feedback from the users of that system, and then I can go at a different pace behind the scenes as well. So
I was going to say, I think that's really important for the healthcare, because things change so much, not just from the regulation side, but with the needs of the patient. And 2.5 years ago, we all were doing telehealth. Now I'm kind of comfortable going back in, but telehealth's nice. I don't have to leave. And I think the doctors and nurses and providers like telehealth too, because they can get more done. So I think you're going to have that idea of, okay, I need to change this way. Okay, now I need to change that way. And if you've got this heavy application that can't be changed, we talked about customization earlier, that makes things a lot more difficult. We talked APIs a little bit, but DevSecOps also comes in this idea that, okay, how do we kind of continually improve, innovate? Are you getting requests like that too?
And that's something we use more in the BizSec DevOps. So how do you get the business engaged early? How do you make sure it's secure and compliant all the way through, depending on what you're pursuing? But absolutely, we're seeing that.
Yeah, that's one of the common themes we hear from CIOs. We got to be more agile, right? We got to be more in the DevSecOps model. As we wrap up our session here, we have maybe a couple minutes left here. The one thing we didn't talk about is security, right? You got to have a conversation about security when we talk about cloud and data. Where, from a healthcare perspective, we know where there's HIPAA and we know that the data is really important. Are there any trends, anything you're seeing from your clients around security, what they're asking for? Is it all FedRAMP High or IL5 from a DoD perspective, or what's happening in that arena?
I'm not aware of any particular major trend that always leans a particular way, but absolutely a lot more SaaS solutions, in particular in health, are FedRAMP compliant. They've also got some of the compliancy to accelerate that. So then when you're trying to implement it in your production, you've got a certain level of tick box, and then you just do the surrounding components of it. So we are seeing a lot of vendors, even providers like AWS, Azure, and all the software providers coming in with pre-certified at different levels. Yeah. And that's important because you don't want to pay the premium either if your business workload is quite at the lower end. So we're seeing the industry really pick up on that and give you some assurance when you start.
And I think for a lot of agencies, they have to think about, okay, this is sensitive data, but how sensitive? And am I right? Do I need high, or is moderate good? Or do I need a different type of approach to the security? And of course, we could talk about zero trust too, but we won't bore people. We're just about out of time before I let you go, and I've enjoyed our conversation. What's the big takeaway from our conversation today? What do you think from healthcare providers and cloud? What should they keep in mind as they continue to modernize and digitally transform?
I would suggest the key message is there are ways you can achieve success with cloud, and also a variety of automations, and it doesn't have to be all at once. It could be evolutionary, and whether you're ready 100% or partially, there are benefits to be gained in taking a step back and looking at, here's my problem set, and then matching them with a variety of solutions that the industry and companies like us can bring to the table.
I think that's great advice, because nobody can eat the apple in one bite. No one can drink the ocean in one gulp. And I think people understand there's also no budget for it all too. So all those pieces are great advice. And unfortunately, we're out of time today. So let me thank my guest. Kass Singh is the Vice President and a Solution Architect in the Health Group at Leidos. Kass, thank you so much for taking the time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the Cloud Exchange.